We're all conditioned to think of conflict in terms of, kinetics, tanks crossing borders, missiles, special forces.
Right.
But the real map of the 21st century, it's being drawn in boardrooms, not in situation rooms.
We're talking about corporate statecraft.
Yeah.
And honestly, when I first saw that term, I thought, great, another buzzword. But as I got into the research, it started reading less like an economics paper.
And more like a spy novel.
Yeah, like a John le Carre novel. It's this idea that companies, infrastructure, and debt are the new heavy artillery.
It's incredibly high stakes, but it's subtle. This is the invisible war. And the battlefield is very specific, the global south.
So we're looking at how great powers, we're talking mainly the US and China, are maneuvering for control over the architecture of the future global economy.
And they're not using soldiers, they're using engineers and bankers.
Okay, let's set the stage here. The players are clear. You've got the US, the incumbent superpower, China, the challenger, and then this massive contest zone, Latin America, Africa, the Middle East. Why there? Why is a fight for a lithium mine in Argentina so critical?
Well, because that's where the inputs are. I mean, if you want to build the future EVs, advanced chips, renewable energy grids, you need the raw materials that are buried in these regions.
Okay, so resources.
But a little more than that. That's where the growth is. These are the markets that will define the next 50 years, control the infrastructure there, and you effectively control the flow of the entire global economy.
So the objective is control. But the method, that's what gets really interesting. The sources talk about this unified strategic approach, especially with China. It's not just, hey, we'll build you a bridge.
No, and this is where a lot of Western observers really miss the point. They see a single construction project. Beijing sees an ecosystem. When a Chinese state-owned enterprise, an SOE, bids on a project under the Belt and Road Initiative, they don't just bring concrete and steel, they bring the whole package.
Break that package down for me. What's in it?
It's a bundle. So first, you get the financing. It's usually from a policy bank like the Export-Import Bank of China.
Okay.
Then that financing often mandates that you have to use a Chinese construction firm. Then that firm uses Chinese tech standards, Chinese equipment, and it's all wrapped in high-level political engagement from Beijing.
A completely closed loop.
Totally. Now, compare that to a Western bid. You might get a grant from one agency, a loan from a commercial bank, a contractor from a third country.
Too fragmented.
It is. The Chinese offer is just sign here, we handle everything, and we do it fast.
That speed, that seems to be the killer app here. I mean, if I'm a leader in a developing nation, I have an election coming up, I need a railway now, I don't have 5 years for studies and reviews.
Exactly. The China model prioritizes speed and scale over all the governance questions that usually slow down Western financing. But, and here's the twist, that speed comes with a very specific kind of hangover. It's what the research calls the lock-in.
This is the part that sounded terrifyingly brilliant. It's not just that you owe money, is it? It's that you're technically unable to leave.
Right. Think about it operationally. Let's say you buy a whole telecom grid. If the vendor installs their own proprietary signaling systems and trains your entire workforce on their specific software,
And they hold the keys to the maintenance updates.
you're married to them. It's a sunk cost trap on a national scale. If you want to switch to a Western vendor 5 years later, you can't just plug in the new gear. You have to rip everything out, retrain thousands of engineers.
The switching costs are just too high.
Astronomically high, so you're locked in, and that commercial dependency, that becomes strategic influence.
That is a perfect segue. Let's see where this is actually hitting the ground. The sources point to South America as a primary theater.
South America is fascinating. You have two different wars happening at the same time. The war for the ground and the war for the airways.
Let's start with the ground. The lithium triangle.
Yeah.
Argentina, Chile, Bolivia. We all know lithium is the new oil. The source focuses on a company called Ganfeng Lithium.
Ganfeng is a textbook example of this. They aren't just, digging holes in the salt flats of Argentina. They're building the energy infrastructure to power those mines. But the critical piece is something called the off-take agreement.
Off-take agreement. Okay, that sounds like really boring legal jargon, but I have a feeling it's the smoking gun here.
It is the smoking gun. An off-take agreement basically says, we'll finance this mine, but in return, we get the right to buy, say, 80% of the lithium produced for the next 20 years.
So they're securing the supply chain right at the source.
Correct. For China, this isn't just about profit. This is national security. They are locking down the upstream inputs for the global EV battery market. By the time that lithium comes out of the ground, it's already spoken for.
And for a country like Argentina, I mean, they're going through massive economic volatility. They need the cash.
They're desperate for capital. Western investors might be skittish. Ganfeng shows up with a checkbook and a plan. It's a lifeline, but it means the raw material for the future flows to Asia.
Now let's look at the other side of that coin in South America. Telecoms. The digital grid. The sources highlight Huawei's dominance. This is where the U.S. starts shouting about security risks.
Absolutely. The U.S. warns about backdoors, espionage, yes, but you have to look at it from the perspective of a mayor in, say, Colombia. They have a limited budget and they need to get their population online.
And Huawei is the cheapest and fastest option.
It's not just the price, it's the financing. Huawei often comes with generous payment terms backed by Chinese state banks. They deploy rapidly. The sources call the reaction from Latin American governments pragmatic non-alignment.
Meaning they aren't picking Team China out of ideology. They're just shopping for the best deal.
Precisely. They refuse to treat their infrastructure as an ideological choice. They want connectivity. And if Washington says, don't buy Huawei, their response is, okay, are you going to fund the alternative? And usually the answer has been crickets.
That pragmatic non-alignment, that feels like a recurring theme. Let's move to Middle East. The sources bring up Saudi Arabia. This feels like a much more complex game.
It is. Saudi Arabia is executing what the text calls strategic hedging. They have this massive plan, Vision 2030, to transform their economy away from oil. And to do that, they need the best tech in the world, and they really don't care where it comes from.
The double agent strategy. They're playing both sides.
In a way. On the physical side, the towers, the fiber, the cloud servers, they're partnering heavily with Chinese firms. Again, speed of deployment.
But they're not locking the U.S. out.
No, and that's the hedge. At the same time, they are using their own capital through vehicles like Aramco Digital to invest in American software and something called Open RAN architectures.
Explain Open RAN quickly for us.
It stands for Open Radio Access Network. Basically, it lets you build networks where the hardware and software are separated, so you can mix and match vendors.
So it prevents that lock-in we talked about.
Exactly. So they use Chinese hardware for the heavy lifting, but invest in American software to keep the system open and flexible.
So they're diversifying their dependency.
Riyadh ensures that neither Beijing nor Washington can just pull the plug on them. It's a masterclass in preserving autonomy.
Incredibly savvy. Okay, let's shift to where the physical stakes are arguably the highest. Logistics. Moving dirt to money. We're going to Africa.
Scene 3. The Corridor Wars. This is all about how you get copper and cobalt from the heart of Africa out to global markets.
And the outline points to the Libido Corridor. This is actually a U.S.-backed initiative, isn't it?
Yes, and that's significant. It shows the U.S. is trying to get back in the game. The Libido Corridor is a railway line. It links the mining belts of the DRC and Zambia to the port of Libido in Angola.
So why does this one railway matter so much?
Because right now, most of that mineral wealth flows east, through ports in East Africa, often on Chinese-financed infrastructure heading to Chinese processing plants. The Libido Corridor offers a route west, to the Atlantic.
It's a literal bypass route.
It is, and it really highlights the difference in strategy. The Chinese model in Africa is often full spectrum. They own the mine, the road, the processing plant, and the bank loan.
It's vertical integration.
Yes. The U.S. and its partners are trying selective intervention. They're targeting specific logistical choke points. They aren't trying to own the whole value chain. They're just trying to break the monopoly on logistics by opening a second door.
And what about the African nations themselves?
Far from being spectators, they're using this competition as leverage. Countries like Zambia are now able to negotiate better deals, saying, if you want our copper, you have to help us process it here. We want value-added industries.
But we have to talk about the elephant in the room here. The debt. All this infrastructure costs billions. What happens when the bill comes due?
And that brings us to the cautionary tale. Sri Lanka, the Hambantota port.
Okay, let's be careful here. We've all seen the debt trap diplomacy headlines, but the source material is much more nuanced.
It is, and accuracy really matters. We shouldn't call it a trap as if it was some premeditated plot to foreclose. The source describes it as a sovereign liquidity crisis. Sri Lanka had debt from all over, not just China. They ran out of cash.
Pay their bills.
Right. They faced a balance of payments crisis and had to monetize an asset, so they entered into a negotiation.
They traded the port for debt relief.
Effectively, yes. They leased a controlling stake in the port to China Merchants Port Holdings for 99 years.
99 years. That number. It has some historical echoes.
The irony is palpable, yes. But here's the corporate statecraft reality. It doesn't matter if it was a trap or just bad financial planning. The outcome is what's strategic.
The outcome being that a Chinese state-owned firm now controls a deep-water port on a critical Indian Ocean shipping lane.
Precisely. Even if the intent was purely commercial, the result is deeply strategic. You don't need a Navy base if you own the landlord rights to the commercial terminal.
That's the core of this whole thing. Commercial deals with geopolitical aftershocks.
So is the U.S. just watching? We mentioned libido, but is there a broader strategy?
The U.S. is trying to pivot. The source says the U.S. needs to double down on corporate statecraft, but it faces a huge structural problem.
Which is?
The U.S. government cannot order a company like Bechtel or Apple to go build a bridge in the Congo. It doesn't have state-owned enterprises. It can't just direct capital like Beijing can.
So how do you fight a state-led model with the private market model? You have to align incentive. The sources talk about better coordination, using agencies like the Development Finance Corporation to de-risk these big projects.
Make it safe enough for private American money to go in.
Exactly. Frame it as a strategic partnership. The U.S. argument has to become about quality and transparency. Our road won't crumble in 2 years. Our loan terms are public.
But that all takes time. It's hard to sell quality when the other guy's selling fast and cheap.
That's the eternal struggle. But the source makes a key point. This is no longer optional. If the West cedes the field on infrastructure, they are essentially ceding the physical platform of the 21st century global economy.
It really changes how you look at a world map. You stop seeing borders and start seeing fiber optic cables and rail gauges.
And you realize those connections are the tethers that bind nations together.
So let's wrap this up with the big picture. You have China integrating everything, finance, construction, politics. You have the U.S. trying to get its private sector to compete. And you have Global South playing the middle. What's the end game here?
The source leaves us with a really provocative thought. It comes down to integration. China treats business and national security as one single unified instrument.
While the U.S. historically has treated them as separate worlds. Market forces over here, defense over there.
And in a contest between a unified strategy and a divided one, the unified strategy usually sets the tempo. If the U.S. can't bridge that gap,
if it can't make corporate statecraft work in a democracy,
then the architecture of the 21st century is going to be written in Beijing.
It's not about who has the most tanks anymore. It's about who writes the code and who owns the concrete.
That's the reality. The invisible war is already being fought. It's just buried deep in the terms and conditions.
Well, on that cheerful thought, we'll leave you to check the fine print on your next contract. Thanks for diving in with us.
Thanks for listening and being a part of the RH community. Would you like to receive the same daily intel brief that Glenn and I read? You can get it at restrictedhandling.com. We've curated what we consider to be the most relevant and reputable sources on all things international security, geopolitics, military and intel ops, and economics and sanctions, focused exclusively on Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and the Middle East, to include accompanying podcasts for Russia, China, economics, and spy stories. Just head to restrictedhandling.com, enter your email, and you'll get the daily briefs that Glenn and I both read, and you can leave comments and questions that we can respond to. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe.